Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the shadows of a Benin bronze caster's workshop at the stroke of midnight, where the air shimmers with heat and ancient secrets that could change how you see art forever. Picture this. You're crouched behind clay pots in a dimly lit workshop, watching master craftsmen chant words that have been whispered for over 500 years. Their voices rising and falling like a heartbeat as molten bronze glows like captured starlight. But here's the mystery that's puzzled historians for centuries. Why did these artists only perform their most sacred work in complete darkness? In a couple of minutes, you'll find out how these midnight chants weren't just tradition, but the actual secret to creating bronze so perfect that European museums still can't replicate the technique today. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the greatest art treasures of Africa were born in darkness, and how a simple clay mixture became the foundation of an empire. Here's what makes this even more incredible. Benin bronze casters could create details so fine that individual hairs and facial expressions were perfectly captured in metal, yet they worked entirely by touch and sound in the dead of night. But here's the twist that breaks everything you think you know about ancient metalworking. These bronze masterpieces weren't actually bronze at all, but a secret brass alloy that required techniques so advanced modern metallurgists are still trying to figure out how they did it. And honestly, if you think you could handle working with 2,000-degree molten metal in pitch darkness while chanting ancient incantations, you probably wouldn't survive your first night in a medieval Benin workshop. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from, whether you're dodging homework or just can't sleep. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the workshop entrance, your bare feet silent on the packed earth floor, and immediately feel the weight of centuries pressing down on your shoulders. The air is thick with the scent of palm oil, charcoal, and something else, something metallic and ancient that makes your skin tingle. Your eyes struggle to adjust to the darkness, broken only by the dull red glow of banked furnaces that pulse like sleeping dragons. The workshop stretches before you, filled with shadows that seem to move and breathe, and you realize you've entered a place where time moves differently, where the modern world simply doesn't exist. Around you, the bronze casters move like ghosts, their silhouettes barely visible against the furnace glow. They're already deep into their work, hands moving with practiced precision over clay molds and wax models, their voices joining in a low, rhythmic chant that seems to vibrate through the very walls. You catch fragments of words and languages that predate the kingdoms you learned about in school, syllables that roll off tongues like water over stones. The sound is hypnotic, almost musical, and you find yourself swaying slightly as the rhythm seeps into your bones. The workshop itself is a marvel of organization despite the darkness. Clay pots line the walls, each one carefully positioned and filled with materials you can't quite identify. Shelves hold tools that gleam dully in the firelight: hammers, chisels, brushes made from animal hair, and strange implements that look more like surgical instruments than anything meant for metalwork. The floor is swept clean, every surface arranged with the kind of precision that speaks of generations of practice, of knowledge passed down through bloodlines and guild secrets. You notice how the master caster's movements seem almost ritualistic as he checks each furnace, his weathered hands testing the heat with gestures that look more like blessings than practical work. The apprentices follow his every move, their young faces serious in the firelight, understanding that they're not just learning a trade but inheriting a sacred trust. The chanting grows stronger as more voices join in, the words weaving together into something that feels less like language and more like music, each syllable timed to match the rhythm of hammers on metal and the whoosh of bellows feeding the flames. The Kingdom of Benin, which flourished from the 13th to the 19th centuries in what is now southern Nigeria, was renowned throughout West Africa for its sophisticated bronze casting techniques. The royal court commissioned thousands of bronze plaques, sculptures, and ceremonial objects that served both as artistic masterpieces and historical records, documenting everything from royal ceremonies to the arrival of Portuguese traders in the 15th century. These works required such technical mastery that European visitors consistently marveled at their quality, with some refusing to believe that African artisans could have created such sophisticated art. Historians still argue whether the midnight timing was purely ceremonial or if there were practical reasons for working in darkness. Some suggest that the cooler night air provided better temperature control for the delicate casting process, while others believe the darkness was essential for reading the subtle color changes in heated metal that determined the perfect moment for pouring. Whatever the reason, you can feel the power in this nocturnal ritual, the sense that you're witnessing something that bridges the gap between craft and magic. As your eyes adjust further, you begin to make out individual faces in the gloom. The master caster stands near the largest furnace, his weathered hands moving in gestures that seem to direct not just his apprentices, but the very flames themselves. His voice rises above the others, leading the chant with an authority that comes from decades of practice. Younger men cluster around him, their movements careful and reverent, and you realize you're watching a hierarchy as complex and structured as any royal court. There's a quirky belief among some researchers that the bronze casters deliberately worked at midnight because they believed the spirits of their ancestors were most active during the darkest hours, guiding their hands and ensuring the success of each casting. While this might sound like superstition to modern ears, you can't deny the almost supernatural precision these artisans achieved, creating works of art that have survived centuries and continue to astound viewers today. You move deeper into the workshop, drawn by the soft sounds of hands working clay, and find yourself at the heart of the bronze caster's most sacred ritual. The air here is different, heavier, almost alive with the scent of river mud and palm oil that clings to your skin like a blessing. Before you, 3 apprentices kneel around a large wooden bowl, their hands disappearing into what looks like ordinary clay but feels like something far more precious. The master caster watches from the shadows, his voice a low rumble as he guides them through incantations that have shaped metal for over 5 centuries. The clay preparation isn't just mixing, it's alchemy. You watch as the apprentices work river mud from the sacred Benin River, the same waters that have blessed this kingdom since before the first Portuguese ships appeared on the horizon. The mud is dark, almost black, with a texture that seems to shimmer in the firelight. One apprentice adds palm oil drop by precious drop, each addition accompanied by a whispered prayer to Ogun, the Yoruba god of iron and metalworking. The mixture transforms under their hands, becoming something that feels alive, responsive, almost eager to take shape. The master caster steps forward, his weathered hands joining theirs in the bowl. "The clay must know your spirit," he murmurs, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "It must trust you before it will hold the fire." You realize this isn't just about creating a mold, it's about establishing a relationship between the artisan and his materials, a bond that will determine whether the final casting succeeds or fails spectacularly in a shower of molten metal and shattered dreams. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze casters developed their clay recipes through centuries of experimentation, creating mixtures that could withstand the extreme temperatures required for brass casting while maintaining the fine detail needed for royal commissions. The clay had to be strong enough to contain molten metal heated to over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, yet delicate enough to capture the finest details of facial expressions, textile patterns, and ceremonial regalia. This balance required not just technical knowledge, but an almost intuitive understanding of how different clay compositions would behave under extreme stress. You lean closer, mesmerized by the rhythmic kneading, and notice how each apprentice's technique is slightly different. The youngest works with quick, nervous movements, his hands barely making contact with the clay before pulling away. The eldest moves with confident strokes, his fingers seeming to read the clay's texture like a blind man reading scripture. The middle apprentice finds his own rhythm, somewhere between caution and confidence, his movements growing more assured as the chant continues. There's a quirky tradition that each bronze caster must add a drop of his own saliva to the clay mixture, believing that this personal contribution creates a spiritual connection between the artisan and his work. While this might sound unsanitary to modern sensibilities, some researchers suggest that the enzymes in saliva might actually have helped with the clay's binding properties, making this superstition accidentally scientific. The chanting grows more complex as the clay reaches the proper consistency. The words are in Old Edo, the language of the Benin court, mixed with phrases that sound even older, remnants of traditions that predate written history. You catch fragments that seem to be instructions, others that sound like prayers, and some that feel like warnings. The rhythm matches the kneading, creating a hypnotic symphony of voice and motion that makes your eyelids heavy despite the excitement of witnessing something so ancient and sacred. As the clay preparation continues, you notice other apprentices preparing additional materials. One tends a small fire where palm kernels burn with a sweet, smoky scent that mingles with the workshop's other aromas. Another carefully measures powdered charcoal, sifting it through a cloth so fine it must have taken weeks to weave. A third sorts through what looks like ordinary sand but gleams with tiny flecks that catch the firelight, probably quartz, or some other mineral that will help the clay withstand the thermal shock of molten metal. The master caster tests the clay's readiness by pressing his thumb deep into the mixture and watching how it responds. Too wet, and it will crack when heated. Too dry, and it won't hold the fine details that make Benin bronzes legendary. He nods approvingly and signals for the apprentices to begin the next phase. They divide the clay into portions, each one destined for a different part of the casting process, some for the initial mold, others for the outer shell, and the finest, smoothest clay reserved for the surfaces that will touch the wax model directly. Historians still argue whether the specific clay recipes were closely guarded guild secrets, or if they evolved naturally from the local materials available around Benin City. Some evidence suggests that certain clay deposits were considered sacred and could only be harvested during specific ceremonies, while other sources indicate that the bronze casters were pragmatic enough to use whatever materials produced the best results, regardless of their spiritual significance. You watch as one apprentice begins shaping a small test piece, his hands moving with surprising grace for someone so young. The clay responds to his touch like it's eager to please, forming smooth curves and sharp edges with equal ease. The master caster observes critically, occasionally reaching out to adjust a technique or correct a motion. The clay remembers everything, he says softly. Every touch, every prayer, every doubt. Make sure it remembers only good things. The preparation ritual concludes with a final blessing, all voices joining in a chant that seems to make the very air vibrate. The clay sits in its bowl, dark and gleaming, ready to become the foundation for masterpieces that will outlast empires. You realize you've witnessed something that connects this midnight workshop to bronze casters across centuries, a chain of knowledge and tradition that has survived kingdoms rising and falling, colonial invasions, and the passage of time itself. You follow the master caster to a workbench where blocks of golden wax sit waiting like sleeping sculptures, their surfaces smooth and warm to the touch even in the cool night air. The candlelight flickers across the workspace, casting dancing shadows that make the tools seem alive. Delicate knives, heated styluses, and brushes so fine they must be made from single hairs. This is where the magic truly begins, where formless wax becomes the blueprint for bronze immortality, and where one wrong cut can destroy weeks of preparation and planning. The master caster lifts a block of beeswax, rolling it between his palms until it becomes pliable. The wax has been mixed with other materials, tree resins that make it harder, palm oil that keeps it workable, and secret ingredients that each guild guards jealously. You watch as he begins to shape a human figure, his fingers moving with the confidence of someone who has done this thousands of times. But this isn't just any figure. This is a portrait of the Oba himself, the divine king whose image will soon grace the walls of the royal palace. The level of detail required is staggering. Every coral bead in the Oba's crown must be individually carved, each one no larger than a grain of rice. The intricate patterns on his ceremonial robes need to be perfect, because these bronze plaques serve as both art and historical record. Future generations will study these images to understand how their ancestors dressed, what ceremonies looked like, and how the kingdom's power was displayed. One apprentice works on the Oba's face, using a heated stylus to carve lines so fine they're barely visible, yet each one crucial for capturing the royal likeness. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze plaques were far more than decorative art. They functioned as a sophisticated visual library that documented the kingdom's history, religious practices, and political relationships. These rectangular panels, typically measuring about 16 by 20 inches, were mounted on the wooden pillars of the royal palace, creating gallery walls that told the story of Benin's greatness. Each plaque required weeks of work, from the initial wax carving to the final polishing, and represented a significant investment of the kingdom's most precious resources and skilled labor. You lean closer to watch an apprentice work on a ceremonial sword, its blade decorated with symbols that seem to writhe in the candlelight. The young man's hands shake slightly as he carves, and you can see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. The master caster notices too, placing a steadying hand on the apprentice's shoulder. "The ancestors guide your hands," he whispers. "Trust them, and trust yourself." The apprentice takes a deep breath, and his movements become sure, more confident. There's a quirky belief among Benin bronze casters that wax models must be completed during a single night's work, because interrupting the process allows evil spirits to enter the sculpture and corrupt the final bronze. While this might sound like superstition, it actually served a practical purpose. Wax can change consistency dramatically with temperature fluctuations, so working continuously in stable conditions produced more consistent results. The workshop fills with the soft sounds of carving, the whisper of heated metal through wax, the gentle scraping of detail work, the occasional satisfied sigh when a particularly difficult section comes out perfectly. You notice how each artisan has developed his own rhythm, his own way of holding tools, his own method for achieving the impossible precision that makes Benin bronzes legendary. Some work in quick, confident strokes, while others move slowly and deliberately, building up details layer by microscopic layer. As you watch, you begin to understand the incredible skill required for this work. The wax model must be a perfect positive of the final bronze, every detail exactly as it should appear in metal. But wax is fragile, temperamental, and unforgiving. Too much heat from the stylus, and it melts away. Too little, and the tool won't cut cleanly. The artisan must maintain perfect control over temperature, pressure, and timing while working by candlelight in the middle of the night. The master caster moves between workstations, offering guidance and correction with the patience of someone who understands that mastery takes decades to achieve. He shows one apprentice how to create the illusion of depth in a flat relief, using subtle variations in thickness to make figures appear to step forward from the background. Another receives instruction on how to carve the complex geometric patterns that border each plaque, designs that carry spiritual significance and must be executed with mathematical precision. You watch as an apprentice works on a plaque depicting Portuguese traders, their strange clothes and pale skin rendered with the same careful attention given to Benin nobles. These foreign visitors had arrived in the late 15th century, bringing new trade opportunities and new challenges to the kingdom. The bronze casters documented their presence with the same meticulous care they applied to royal ceremonies, creating a visual record of first contact between two vastly different worlds. Historians still argue whether the bronze casters worked from live models, detailed drawings, or purely from memory when creating their wax sculptures. Some plaques show such accurate detail in depicting Portuguese clothing and equipment that the artists must have had direct access to these foreign objects, while others suggest a more stylized approach that prioritized symbolic meaning over photographic accuracy. The night deepens, and the wax models begin to take their final form. Each one represents hours of painstaking work, countless tiny decisions about proportion and detail, and the accumulated wisdom of generations of master craftsmen. You realize you're witnessing the birth of objects that will survive for centuries, carrying the stories and dreams of this midnight workshop into a future that none of these artisans can imagine. As the master caster puts the finishing touches on the obus crown, adding the final coral beads with movements so precise they seem almost supernatural, you understand that you're watching more than just artistic creation. You're witnessing the preservation of a kingdom's soul, one careful cut at a time. You watch with held breath as the master caster lifts the completed wax model, a perfect miniature of the oba in full ceremonial regalia, and carries it to the next station where the real test begins. The lost wax process is about to start, and you can feel the tension in the workshop rise like heat from the furnaces. This is where weeks of careful work either transforms into bronze immortality or disappears forever in a catastrophic failure that leaves nothing but melted wax and shattered dreams. The apprentices gather around a large wooden table covered with bowls of prepared clay, their movements careful and reverent. The master caster places the wax model on a bed of fine sand, positioning it with the precision of a surgeon. Every angle matters, every surface must be accessible to the flowing clay, and the positioning will determine how the molten bronze flows during casting. One mistake here, and the entire project becomes an expensive lesson in humility. The first layer of clay must be applied with the delicacy of a lover's touch. You watch as an apprentice dips a soft brush into liquid clay and begins painting the wax model, starting with the finest details. The individual coral beads on the oba's crown, the intricate patterns on his robes, the subtle expression on his royal face. This initial coat, no thicker than a whisper, will capture every microscopic detail of the original wax carving. The clay must be thin enough to flow into the tiniest crevices, yet strong enough to maintain its shape when the wax is melted away. The Kingdom of Benin's lost wax casting technique, known as Serre Perdue, was so sophisticated that it could capture details finer than human hair while maintaining structural integrity strong enough to contain molten metal at nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This process required multiple layers of increasingly coarse clay, each one serving a specific purpose: the inner layer for detail, middle layers for strength, and outer layers for thermal mass and structural support. The entire process could take several days to complete properly. Layer by layer, the clay shell grows thicker around the wax model. Each coat must dry completely before the next is applied, and the drying process is crucial. Too fast, and the clay cracks. Too slow, and moisture becomes trapped, leading to explosive failures when the molten bronze is poured. The apprentices take turns tending small fires that provide gentle, even heat to speed the drying without shocking the delicate clay shell. You notice how the master caster tests each layer by tapping it gently with a small wooden stick, listening to the sound it makes. A hollow ring means the clay is properly dried and bonded to the layer beneath. A dull thud suggests moisture or poor adhesion that could spell disaster. His ear is so trained that he can detect problems that would be invisible to anyone else, problems that could turn hours of work into a puddle of ruined metal. There's a quirky tradition that each clay shell must be blessed by having a small piece of kola nut embedded in the outer layer, believing that this sacred offering will ensure the ancestors' protection during the dangerous casting process. While this might seem like mere superstition, some modern researchers suggest that the tannins in kola nuts might actually help strengthen the clay's binding properties, making this ancient practice accidentally scientific. As the shell thickens, drainage channels and air vents are carefully carved into the clay. These channels will allow the melted wax to escape and provide pathways for the molten bronze to flow evenly throughout the mold. The placement of these channels requires deep understanding of fluid dynamics, knowledge that these artisans gained through generations of trial and error, long before European scientists began studying such principles in universities. You watch an apprentice work on creating the pouring cup, a funnel-shaped depression at the top of the mold where the molten bronze will be introduced. The size and shape of this cup must be precisely calculated to provide enough pressure to force the metal into every corner of the mold while preventing turbulence that could introduce air bubbles or cause the bronze to solidify before reaching the extremities. The master caster examines each mold with the intensity of a general inspecting his troops before battle. He runs his fingers along the surface, feeling for weak spots or irregularities that could cause problems. A small crack in the clay shell could allow molten bronze to leak out, creating a dangerous situation and ruining the casting. He shows the apprentices how to repair minor flaws using a mixture of clay and palm oil, smoothing the patches until they're invisible. The workshop fills with the acrid smell of drying clay and the sweet scent of beeswax beginning to soften in the heat. You realize that the wax models are starting their transformation. Soon they'll be heated until they melt and flow out of the drainage channels, leaving behind perfect negative spaces that will be filled with molten bronze. It's a process that requires absolute faith, because once the wax is gone, there's no way to see inside the mold to check if everything went according to plan. Historians still argue whether the Benin bronze casters developed their lost wax techniques independently or learned them through contact with other metalworking cultures. Some evidence suggests connections to ancient Egyptian or Mediterranean casting traditions, while other scholars point to the unique innovations found in Benin work as proof of independent development. The sophistication of their techniques certainly rivals anything produced in Europe during the same period. As the final layers of clay are applied and smoothed, you can see the transformation taking place. What began as a delicate wax sculpture has become a robust clay shell, ready to withstand the violence of molten metal. The apprentices step back, their work complete for now, and you realize you've witnessed one of the most critical phases in the creation of a bronze masterpiece. Tomorrow, when the wax is melted away and the bronze poured, this careful preparation will either prove its worth or reveal its flaws in the most dramatic way possible. The master caster nods approvingly at the completed molds, but his expression remains serious. The real test is yet to come, and everyone in the workshop knows that even the most careful preparation can't guarantee success when dealing with the unpredictable forces of fire and molten metal. The workshop transforms as the furnaces roar to life, their flames leaping higher than your head and casting wild shadows that dance across the clay-covered walls. You feel the heat wash over you in waves, making your skin tingle and your clothes stick to your back with sweat. The master caster stands before the largest furnace like a priest before an altar, his voice rising in the ancient chants that have guided bronze casters through this most dangerous phase for over 5 centuries. The apprentices join their voices to his, creating a rhythm that matches the bellow's steady breathing and the crackling of charcoal being consumed by hungry flames. The furnace itself is a marvel of medieval engineering, built from special fire-resistant clay and designed to reach temperatures that would melt copper pennies in seconds. You watch as apprentices feed it carefully selected charcoal, each piece chosen for its burning properties and freedom from impurities that could contaminate the bronze. The fuel must burn hot and clean, creating the intense heat needed to melt the brass alloy while producing minimal smoke that could interfere with the delicate casting process. The chanting grows more complex as the temperature rises, the words weaving together in patterns that seem to mirror the flames themselves. Some verses are instructions passed down through generations, teaching the precise timing needed for each phase of the process. Others are prayers to Ogun, asking the god of metalworking to bless their efforts and protect them from the dangers of molten metal. Still others are warnings, reminding everyone of the respect that fire and bronze demand from those who would master them. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze casters developed sophisticated temperature control techniques that allowed them to achieve the precise heat needed for casting their complex brass alloy. Unlike pure copper, which melts at a relatively low temperature, their brass mixture required temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit to flow properly. They controlled these extreme temperatures using carefully designed furnaces, specific types of charcoal, and bellows systems operated by teams of apprentices working in perfect coordination. You notice how each apprentice has a specific role in maintaining the furnace. One tends the bellows, pumping air into the fire with a rhythm that never varies, his movements timed to the master's chant. Another feeds charcoal to the flames, adding fuel at precisely the right moments to maintain steady heat without creating temperature spikes that could damage the crucibles. A third monitors the color of the flames, watching for the subtle changes that indicate when the fire is ready for the bronze. The crucibles themselves are works of art, shaped from special clay that can withstand thermal shock without cracking. You watch as the master caster inspects each one, running his fingers along their surfaces to check for flaws that could cause catastrophic failure when filled with molten metal. These vessels must be perfect. A single crack could allow molten bronze to leak out, creating a dangerous situation that could injure or kill anyone nearby. There's a quirky belief among the bronze casters that the furnace spirits must be appeased with offerings of palm wine and cola nuts before each major casting session. The master caster pours a small amount of palm wine onto the coals, where it hisses and steams, filling the air with sweet, alcoholic vapors. While this might seem like mere superstition, the alcohol actually helps clean the furnace and can improve the burning characteristics of the charcoal. As the furnace reaches optimal temperature, the real drama begins. The master caster signals for the brass ingots to be loaded into the crucibles, chunks of metal that represent weeks of preparation and considerable expense. The brass itself is a carefully balanced alloy of copper, zinc, and small amounts of other metals that give Benin bronzes their distinctive golden color and superior working properties. The exact composition is a closely guarded secret, passed down through guild families and never written down. You watch in fascination as the solid metal begins to glow, first dull red, then bright orange, and finally the brilliant yellow-white that indicates it's approaching the molten state. The transformation is mesmerizing, solid chunks of metal gradually losing their shape, becoming liquid fire that moves and flows like water made of light. The heat is so intense that you have to step back, your face burning despite being several feet from the furnace opening. The chanting reaches a crescendo as the bronze approaches the perfect casting temperature. The master caster's voice rises above the others, calling out instructions and encouragement in the ancient language of the guild. His words are both practical and spiritual, reminding everyone of their responsibilities while invoking the protection of the ancestors who perfected these techniques through centuries of dangerous experimentation. The apprentices move with practiced precision, each one knowing exactly what must be done and when. One prepares the long-handled tools needed to manipulate the crucibles. Another checks that the molds are properly positioned and heated to prevent thermal shock when the molten bronze is poured. A third stands ready with sand and water to deal with any emergencies that might arise when dealing with metal hot enough to melt stone. Historians still argue whether the elaborate chanting and ritual aspects of Benin bronze casting served purely spiritual purposes or if they had practical benefits for coordinating the complex teamwork required for successful casting. Some researchers suggest that the rhythmic chants helped synchronize the apprentices' movements and provided a way to time critical operations without clocks, while others believe the rituals were primarily about maintaining guild traditions and invoking divine protection. The moment of truth approaches as the master caster tests the bronze's readiness by dipping a thin iron rod into the molten metal. The way the bronze flows off the rod tells him everything he needs to know about its temperature and consistency. Too thick, and it won't fill the fine details of the molds. Too thin, and it might burn through the clay shells or create weak spots in the final casting. You feel your heart racing as the master caster nods approvingly and signals that the bronze is ready. The workshop falls silent except for the roar of the furnace and the crackling of burning charcoal. Everyone knows that the next few minutes will determine whether weeks of careful work will result in masterpieces worthy of the royal palace or expensive failures that will have to be melted down and started over again. The moment arrives with the weight of destiny pressing down on the workshop like a physical force. You watch as the master caster grips the long-handled tongs, his weathered hands steady despite the enormous responsibility resting on his shoulders. The molten bronze glows like captured sunlight in the crucible, its surface rippling with heat waves that make the air itself seem to dance. This is the moment when everything, weeks of preparation, generations of knowledge, and the hopes of an entire kingdom, comes down to a single, perfect pour that must be executed without hesitation or error. The apprentices form a human chain around the furnace, each one positioned to assist in the complex choreography of moving liquid fire from crucible to mold. Their faces glisten with sweat and concentration, knowing that one wrong move could result in molten bronze splashing across the workshop floor, potentially killing or maiming anyone in its path. The temperature of the metal is so extreme that a single drop on exposed skin would burn through to the bone in seconds. The master caster lifts the first crucible with movements that seem impossibly smooth and controlled. The molten bronze sloshes gently inside its clay container, a river of liquid gold that weighs more than a grown man and burns hotter than any earthly fire has a right to burn. You hold your breath as he carries it toward the waiting molds, his steps measured and deliberate, every muscle in his body focused on maintaining perfect balance and control. The pouring begins with a prayer whispered so softly you can barely hear it over the roar of the furnaces. The master caster tips the crucible, and molten bronze flows out in a stream of pure light, cascading into the molds opening like a waterfall made of stars. The clay shell hisses and steams as the superheated metal makes contact, and you can smell the distinctive scent of burning wax as the original model melts away, leaving behind the negative space that will become a bronze masterpiece. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze casting required such precise timing and coordination that successful pours were often considered miraculous events. The molten brass had to be poured at exactly the right temperature. Too hot, and it would burn through the clay molds. Too cool, and it wouldn't flow into the finest details. The entire process from furnace to mold had to be completed within minutes, requiring split-second timing and absolute trust between the master caster and his apprentices. You watch in amazement as the bronze flows through the mold's channels, following the pathways carved by the apprentices days earlier. The metal seeks every corner, every crevice, filling the spaces where the wax model once resided with liquid fire that will soon cool into permanent form. Steam and smoke rise from the molds as trapped air escapes and residual moisture is instantly vaporized by the extreme heat. The master caster moves to the second mold, then the third, his movements becoming more fluid and confident as the rhythm of pouring takes hold. Each casting requires slightly different timing and technique. The larger pieces need more bronze and longer pours, while the smaller, more detailed works require quick, precise movements to ensure the metal doesn't begin cooling before reaching the extremities of the mold. There's a quirky tradition that during the pouring ceremony, no one in the workshop is allowed to speak except the master caster, believing that any unexpected sound could startle him and cause a disastrous spill. This silence creates an almost supernatural atmosphere, broken only by the hiss of molten metal, the crackle of flames, and the master's occasional muttered instructions to his assistants. As each mold is filled, apprentices quickly seal the openings with clay plugs to prevent the bronze from flowing back out as it begins to cool. The timing is critical. Sealed too early and trapped air could create bubbles in the casting. Sealed too late and precious bronze could be lost. The apprentices work with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated through years of training and an almost telepathic understanding of what needs to be done. You notice how the workshop's atmosphere changes as the pouring progresses. The initial tension gives way to a kind of focused calm, as if everyone has entered a meditative state where only the work exists. The danger is still present. Molten bronze remains deadly until it cools, but the master caster's confidence spreads to his apprentices, creating a bubble of controlled energy around the casting operation. The final crucible contains bronze destined for the most important piece of the night, a portrait plaque of the Oba himself, commissioned for the royal palace and requiring the finest detail work the guild can achieve. The master caster pauses before this last pour, offering a special prayer to the ancestors and asking for their guidance in creating a work worthy of divine kingship. The bronze flows into the royal mold with what seems like supernatural grace, filling every microscopic detail of the Oba's carved features. You can almost see the individual coral beads taking shape, the intricate patterns of the royal robes emerging from liquid metal, the subtle expression of divine authority being born from fire and clay. This is more than metalworking, it's the creation of immortality, the transformation of earthly materials into objects that will outlast empires. Historians still argue whether the bronze casters' pouring ceremonies were primarily practical or spiritual in nature. Some scholars emphasize the technical precision required for successful casting, while others point to the elaborate rituals and chants as evidence that the process was viewed as a form of sacred communion with divine forces. The truth likely encompasses both perspectives. The technical and spiritual aspects were so intertwined that separating them would have been meaningless to the artisans themselves. As the last drops of bronze disappear into the molds, the workshop falls into an exhausted silence. The most dangerous part of the process is complete, but the real test is yet to come. Now begins the long wait for the metal to cool and solidify, during which the bronze casters can only hope that their careful preparation and precise execution will result in perfect castings rather than expensive failures. The master caster sets down the empty crucible and wipes his brow with a cloth that immediately begins steaming from the heat of his skin. His apprentices gather around him, their faces reflecting the mixture of relief and anticipation that follows every major casting session. They have done everything possible to ensure success. Now they must wait for the bronze to reveal whether their efforts have been blessed by the gods or cursed by some unseen flaw in their technique. The workshop settles into an almost sacred silence as the bronze begins its slow transformation from liquid fire to solid metal. You find yourself drawn into the vigil that follows every casting, a period of waiting that tests the patience and faith of even the most experienced artisans. The molds sit like sleeping giants in the dim light, their clay shells still radiating heat that makes the air shimmer and dance. Inside those protective cocoons, bronze worth a king's ransom is cooling degree by precious degree, and no one can know whether the casting has succeeded until the shells are broken open hours from now. The master caster begins the cooling prayers, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the workshop. These aren't the dramatic chants that accompanied the pouring ceremony, but gentle, rhythmic verses that seem designed to soothe both the cooling bronze and the anxious hearts of the artisans. The apprentices join in, their voices creating a harmony that feels ancient and timeless, as if these same words have been spoken over cooling bronze for 1,000 years. You notice how the prayers change as the night progresses, adapting to each phase of the cooling process. Early verses ask for even temperature distribution to prevent cracking, while later ones request patience and wisdom for the artisans who must wait through the long hours until dawn. Some prayers are addressed to Ogun, the god of metalworking, while others invoke the ancestors who perfected these techniques through generations of trial and error. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze cooling process was as carefully controlled as the heating and pouring phases, requiring specific timing and environmental conditions to prevent defects in the final castings. The bronze had to cool slowly and evenly to avoid thermal stress that could cause cracking or warping. This process typically took 12 to 24 hours depending on the size and thickness of the pieces, during which the workshop maintained a constant vigil to monitor temperature and humidity levels. As the hours pass, you begin to understand the deeper significance of this waiting period. It's not just about temperature control, it's about community, faith, and the bonds that tie the guild together. The apprentices take turns tending small fires that provide gentle, even heat to prevent the molds from cooling too quickly. Others prepare tools and materials for the next day's work, while the most senior artisans share stories and wisdom with their younger colleagues. The master caster moves between the molds like a doctor checking patients, placing his hand near each one to gauge the cooling rate without actually touching the still dangerous clay shells. His experienced fingers can detect temperature differences that would be invisible to anyone else, and his decisions about when to add or remove heat sources could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. There's a quirky tradition that during the cooling vigil, each apprentice must tell a story about bronze casting, either from their own experience or passed down through guild lore. These tales range from triumphant successes to spectacular failures, and they serve both to pass the time and to reinforce important lessons about the craft. Tonight, you hear stories of castings that succeeded against impossible odds and others that failed despite perfect preparation, reminding everyone that bronze casting remains as much art as science. You listen as one apprentice recounts the legend of the Midnight Miracle, a casting that was saved when the master caster dreamed of the exact temperature adjustments needed to prevent cracking. Another tells of the Weeping Bronze, a failed casting that supposedly cried tears of molten metal when the mold was opened, warning the guild of impending disaster. These stories blur the line between history and mythology, but they all carry practical lessons about the importance of patience, attention to detail, and respect for the unpredictable nature of the craft. The workshop's atmosphere during the cooling vigil is unlike anything you've experienced. There's a sense of suspended time, as if the normal rules of day and night don't apply within these walls. The apprentices work quietly on other projects, sharpening tools, preparing clay for future castings, or practicing their carving techniques on scraps of wax. But their attention always returns to the cooling molds, the silent centers around which the entire workshop revolves. As dawn approaches, the master caster begins testing the molds more frequently, using techniques passed down through generations to determine when the bronze has cooled sufficiently for the shells to be safely broken. He listens to the sounds the cooling metal makes, watches for subtle changes in the clay's color, and even sniffs the air for chemical signatures that indicate the bronze's condition. The prayers gradually shift from requests for successful cooling to preparations for the moment of revelation when the molds will be opened. These verses acknowledge both the excitement and anxiety that accompany this critical phase, asking for strength to accept whatever the bronze reveals, whether triumph or disappointment. The apprentices' voices grow stronger as the moment approaches, their harmony reflecting both hope and resignation. Historians still argue whether the elaborate cooling rituals served practical purposes or were primarily spiritual exercises designed to maintain guild cohesion during the stressful waiting period. Some evidence suggests that the prayers and chants helped coordinate the complex temperature management required for successful cooling, while other scholars emphasize their role in preserving guild traditions and providing psychological support during uncertain times. You realize that this vigil represents something profound about the nature of creation itself. The bronze casters have done everything within their power to ensure success. They've prepared perfect clay, carved flawless wax models, maintained precise temperatures, and executed perfect pours. Now they must surrender control to forces beyond their influence, trusting that their careful work will be rewarded with bronze masterpieces worthy of the royal palace. As the first rays of sunlight begin to filter through the workshop's small windows, the master caster announces that the cooling period is nearly complete. The molds have reached the temperature where they can be safely opened, revealing whether weeks of work have resulted in triumph or disaster. The apprentices gather around, their faces reflecting the mixture of excitement and apprehension that marks this moment of truth in every bronze caster's life. The moment of truth arrives with the weight of destiny hanging in the workshop air like incense. You watch as the master caster approaches the first mold, a small hammer in one hand and a chisel in the other, his movements deliberate and reverent as if he's about to open a sacred tomb. The apprentices gather in a tight circle, their breathing shallow with anticipation, knowing that the next few minutes will reveal whether their weeks of careful work have been blessed by the ancestors or cursed by some invisible flaw in their technique. The first tap of the hammer against the clay shell produces a hollow sound that echoes through the workshop like a heartbeat. The master caster pauses, listening to the resonance, his trained ear detecting subtle clues about what lies within. A clear, ringing tone suggests successful casting, while a dull thud could indicate problems, air bubbles, incomplete filling, or worse. He nods approvingly and continues, each strike carefully calculated to crack the protective shell without damaging the precious bronze within. Pieces of clay fall away like broken eggshells, revealing glimpses of golden metal that gleam in the morning light filtering through the workshop windows. The apprentices lean forward, straining to see the first hints of success or failure. A flash of perfect bronze surface draws gasps of relief, while any sign of roughness or incomplete casting could spell disaster for the entire project. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze casting success rate was remarkably high considering the complexity of the process, with master casters achieving successful results in roughly 80% of their attempts. However, even small flaws could render a piece unsuitable for royal use, meaning that many technically successful castings were still considered failures if they didn't meet the exacting standards required for palace decoration. The economic pressure was enormous. Failed castings represented not just lost time and materials, but potentially ruined relationships with royal patrons who expected perfection. As more clay falls away, the bronze plaque begins to emerge like a butterfly from its cocoon. You can see individual details taking shape, The intricate patterns of the Oba's ceremonial robes, the delicate coral beads of his crown, the subtle expression of divine authority captured in metal. Each revealed detail draws murmurs of appreciation from the watching apprentices, who understand better than anyone the incredible skill required to achieve such precision. The master caster works with infinite patience, removing clay fragments piece by piece to avoid scratching or damaging the bronze surface. His movements are almost surgical in their precision, each tap of the hammer calculated to free the casting without marring its perfection. The apprentices assist by carefully collecting the clay pieces, which will be recycled for future molds, and by providing better light and different tools as needed. There's a quirky superstition among bronze casters that the first piece of clay to fall from a mold must be caught before it hits the ground, or the casting will be cursed with invisible flaws that will only appear years later. You watch as one apprentice lunges to catch a falling fragment, earning laughter from his colleagues but also nods of approval for respecting the old traditions, even the seemingly silly ones. As the bronze plaque is fully revealed, the workshop erupts in quiet celebration. The casting is perfect, every detail crisp and clear, every surface smooth and unblemished. The Oba's portrait stares out from the bronze with lifelike intensity, his coral crown glittering in the light, his ceremonial sword rendered with such precision that you can see individual decorative elements no larger than grains of rice. This is bronze casting at its absolute finest, worthy of the royal palace and the divine king it depicts. But not every mold reveals such triumph. The second casting, a ceremonial leopard meant to symbolize royal power, emerges with a flaw. A small air bubble has created a pit in the animal's flank, marring what would otherwise be a masterpiece. The master caster examines the defect carefully, running his finger over the imperfection while calculating whether it can be repaired or if the entire piece must be melted down and recast. The apprentices watch this evaluation with intense interest, knowing that learning to assess and repair flawed castings is as important as creating perfect ones. The master caster explains how this particular flaw occurred, likely due to trapped air that wasn't properly vented during the pouring process, and demonstrates how similar problems can be prevented in future work. Even failure becomes a teaching moment in this workshop where knowledge is more precious than bronze. The third mold reveals a different kind of problem. The bronze has filled the mold completely, but the surface shows the telltale roughness that indicates the metal was poured at slightly too low a temperature. While the casting is technically successful, the surface quality isn't suitable for royal use. The master caster sighs and marks the piece for reworking, knowing that it will need extensive polishing and possibly remelting to meet palace standards. Historians still argue whether the high standards demanded by Benin's royal court helped drive innovations in bronze casting techniques or simply created unnecessary waste of valuable materials and skilled labor. Some scholars suggest that the pursuit of perfection led to technical advances that benefited the entire craft, while others argue that more practical standards would have allowed for greater artistic experimentation and broader access to bronze art. As each mold is opened, the workshop fills with a mixture of celebration and disappointment. Some castings exceed even the master caster's expectations, while others fall short of the standards required for royal commissions. But each result, whether triumph or failure, adds to the collective knowledge of the guild, providing lessons that will inform future work and help train the next generation of bronze casters. The final mold contains the most ambitious piece of the night, a large plaque depicting a royal ceremony with dozens of figures, each one requiring perfect detail work. As the clay shell is carefully removed, you hold your breath along with everyone else in the workshop. This casting represents the pinnacle of the bronze caster's art, the kind of work that establishes reputations and secures royal patronage for generations. The bronze emerges flawlessly, every figure perfectly formed, every detail crisp and clear. The scene comes alive in metal, nobles in elaborate dress, musicians with their instruments, the Oba himself presiding over the ceremony with divine authority. It's a masterpiece that will grace the royal palace for centuries, telling the story of Benin's greatness to future generations who will marvel at the skill of these midnight artisans. The successful castings gleam like captured sunlight on the workshop tables, but you quickly learn that bronze casting is only half the battle. The real magic, the transformation that turns rough metal into mirror-bright masterpieces worthy of the Oba's palace, happens during the polishing phase, a process so secretive and complex that apprentices spend years learning just the basics. You watch as the master caster examines each piece with the intensity of a jeweler, his fingers tracing surfaces that look perfect to your untrained eye but apparently contain flaws invisible to anyone without decades of experience. The polishing begins with the coarsest work, removing the rough edges where bronze flowed into the mold's channels and filing away any imperfections that survive the casting process. You observe an apprentice working with files so fine they look like they're made from silk, each stroke carefully controlled to avoid creating scratches that would require hours of additional work to remove. The bronze responds to his touch like living metal, revealing new depths of color and texture as the surface is gradually refined. But the real secrets emerge when the master caster brings out his collection of polishing compounds, each one stored in small clay pots and guarded more jealously than gold. The first mixture contains charcoal powder ground so fine it feels like silk between your fingers, mixed with palm oil that has been aged for months to achieve the perfect consistency. The apprentices apply this compound with soft leather cloths, working in circular motions that gradually bring out the bronze's natural luster. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze polishing techniques produced surfaces so reflective they could serve as mirrors, achieving a level of finish that European metalworkers couldn't match until the development of modern industrial polishing compounds. The process involved multiple stages using progressively finer abrasives, from coarse charcoal and sand mixtures to final polishes made from secret ingredients that each guild family guarded as closely as their casting techniques. As the work progresses, you notice how each polishing stage reveals new aspects of the bronze's character. The initial rough surface gives way to a warm, golden glow that seems to emanate from within the metal itself. Details that were merely present in the casting become vivid and lifelike under the polishing cloths. The Oba's facial features gain depth and personality. The patterns on ceremonial robes begin to shimmer with their own inner light. The master caster demonstrates the second stage of polishing, using a compound that includes crushed palm kernels mixed with a liquid that smells faintly of fermented fruit. He explains that this mixture has been used by his family for 7 generations, the recipe passed down from father to son and never written down. The exact proportions are adjusted based on the humidity, the phase of the moon, and even the bronze caster's intuition about what each particular piece needs. There's a quirky belief among Benin bronze casters that the polishing compounds must be mixed while singing specific songs that help bind the ingredients together spiritually as well as physically. While this might sound like superstition, Some modern researchers suggest that the rhythmic mixing motion required by these songs actually helps create more uniform particle distribution in the polishing compounds, improving their effectiveness. You watch in fascination as an apprentice works on polishing the ceremonial leopard, his movements becoming almost hypnotic as he follows the contours of the bronze animal's muscular form. Each stroke of the polishing cloth reveals new details, individual spots on the leopard's coat, the texture of its fur, the fierce intelligence in its bronze eyes. The transformation is so dramatic that the sculpture seems to come alive under his hands. The third polishing stage introduces compounds so fine and precious that they're measured out grain by grain. One mixture contains powdered coral that has been blessed by the royal priests, while another includes dust from specific types of river stones that can only be found during the dry season. The master caster applies these final polishes himself, his movements so practiced and precise that they seem almost ritualistic. As the polishing continues, the workshop fills with the soft sounds of cloth against metal and the gentle scraping of files removing microscopic imperfections. The apprentices work in shifts, because the repetitive motions required for proper polishing can cause fatigue that leads to mistakes. A single careless stroke at this stage could ruin hours of careful work, so everyone maintains absolute concentration despite the tedious nature of the task. The master caster reveals one of his most closely guarded secrets, a final polishing compound that includes palm wine that has been aged in bronze vessels for an entire year. The alcohol helps dissolve microscopic residues while the aging process in bronze containers adds trace elements that enhance the final finish. He applies this mixture with cloths made from the softest cotton, working with movements so gentle they're barely perceptible. You notice how the polishing process affects not just the bronze's appearance, but its very essence. The rough castings that emerged from the molds looked impressive but somehow incomplete. Under the polishing cloths, they transform into objects that seem to glow with their own inner light, surfaces so perfect they reflect not just images but emotions, capturing and holding the viewer's attention with almost supernatural power. The final stage of polishing involves a technique so secret that the master caster sends all but his most trusted apprentices away before beginning. You're allowed to stay, but warned that what you see must never be shared outside the guild. He produces a small vial containing a liquid that looks like liquid starlight, applying it with a brush made from a single hair taken from the Oba's ceremonial horse. Historians still argue whether the extraordinary finish achieved by Benin bronze casters was purely the result of superior polishing techniques, or if they had access to unique materials not available to other metalworking cultures. Some researchers have attempted to analyze the surface composition of museum pieces, but the complexity of the polishing compounds and the effects of centuries of aging make it nearly impossible to reverse engineer the original techniques. As the polishing nears completion, the bronze pieces begin to achieve the mirror-like finish that made Benin bronzes legendary throughout West Africa and beyond. The surfaces become so reflective that you can see your own face clearly in the Oba's ceremonial crown, so smooth that running your finger across them feels like touching liquid metal that has somehow been frozen in time. The transformation is complete when the master caster steps back and nods approvingly at the finished pieces. What began as rough bronze castings have become objects of such beauty and perfection that they seem to transcend their material nature, becoming vessels for the artistic vision and spiritual beliefs of an entire civilization. The gleaming bronze pieces sit like treasures from another world, But you soon discover that creating them is only the beginning of a complex social drama that unfolds within the Bronze Casters Guild. The workshop may seem like a place of artistic collaboration, but beneath the surface lies a hierarchy as rigid and carefully structured as the royal court itself. You watch as the master caster's eldest apprentice approaches one of the finished plaques, only to be sharply rebuked for touching a piece destined for royal use. Apparently, only those who have achieved certain ranks within the guild are permitted to handle commissions of such importance. The guild system that governs bronze casting in Benin is a labyrinth of traditions, privileges, and restrictions that can take decades to fully understand. You observe how apprentices are divided into distinct levels, each marked by subtle differences in their clothing, the tools they're allowed to use, and even where they're permitted to stand during different phases of the work. The newest apprentices, some barely old enough to lift a hammer, spend their first years doing nothing but preparing clay and tending fires, forbidden from even touching the precious bronze until they've proven their dedication and skill. The master caster explains the progression through the guild ranks, his voice carrying the weight of tradition that stretches back centuries. First-year apprentices are called clay children, responsible only for the most basic tasks and forbidden from speaking during casting ceremonies. After 3 years of faithful service, they become fire tenders, allowed to work the bellows and feed charcoal to the furnaces. Only after 7 years can an apprentice become a bronze toucher, permitted to handle finished pieces and assist with polishing work. The Kingdom of Benin's bronze casting guilds were among the most sophisticated craft organizations in medieval Africa, with membership strictly controlled through hereditary lines and elaborate initiation ceremonies. These guilds maintained monopolies on bronze production for the royal court, ensuring quality control while also preserving trade secrets that gave Benin a competitive advantage over neighboring kingdoms. The guild structure provided social security for members while maintaining the high standards required for royal commissions. You notice how even the seating arrangements in the workshop reflect the guild hierarchy. The master caster sits on a carved wooden stool that marks his supreme authority, while senior apprentices occupy simple benches arranged in order of their rank. The newest apprentices stand throughout the long working sessions, earning the right to sit only after demonstrating their commitment through months of faithful service. This may seem harsh by modern standards, but you realize it creates a system where every privilege is earned and every advancement carries real meaning. The trials that apprentices must pass to advance through the ranks are as challenging as any university examination. You watch as a young man attempts the steady hand test, trying to carve intricate patterns in wax while balancing a bowl of water on his head. A single drop spilled means starting over, and some apprentices attempt this test dozens of times before succeeding. Another trial involves memorizing and reciting the complete genealogies of all guild masters going back 10 generations, demonstrating not just memory but commitment to preserving the guild's history. There's a quirky tradition that apprentices who fail their advancement trials 3 times must spend a full month working only with their non-dominant hand, believing that this forces them to develop the patience and humility necessary for true mastery. While this might seem like mere punishment, many successful bronze casters credit this experience with teaching them the mental discipline that separates true artists from mere craftsmen. The social dynamics within the guild extend far beyond the workshop walls. You learn that guild membership determines not just professional opportunities but marriage prospects, housing assignments, and even burial rites. The families of master bronze casters form an elite class within Benin society. Their children automatically granted apprenticeships while outsiders must petition for years just to be considered for admission. This hereditary system ensures continuity of knowledge, but also creates tensions with talented individuals born outside the guild families. The master caster's authority extends to every aspect of his apprentices' lives. He arranges marriages, settles disputes, and even determines which apprentices will be allowed to specialize in different aspects of the craft. Some will become experts in wax carving, others in clay preparation, and only a select few will be trained in the complete process from start to finish. This specialization ensures that no single individual can threaten the guild's monopoly by setting up independent operations. You observe a fascinating ritual where apprentices must present gifts to their master on the anniversary of their admission to the guild. These aren't simple tokens but carefully crafted objects that demonstrate their growing skills. Carved wooden tools, specially prepared clay mixtures, or small bronze pieces created during their personal time. The master examines each gift critically, using it as an opportunity to assess progress and identify areas needing improvement. The guild's influence extends to the royal court itself, where master bronze casters hold positions of considerable prestige and political influence. The Oba relies on their artistic vision to communicate his power and divine authority, making them essential partners in maintaining royal legitimacy. This relationship creates opportunities for advancement but also enormous pressure. A bronze caster who fails to meet royal expectations might find his entire guild facing punishment or exile. Historians still argue whether the rigid hierarchy of Benin's bronze casting guilds fostered excellence through competition and clear standards or stifled innovation by limiting access to training and resources. Some scholars point to the extraordinary quality of Benin bronzes as evidence that the system worked effectively, while others suggest that more open access might have led to even greater artistic achievements and broader cultural participation. The evening's work concludes with a ceremony where the master caster formally acknowledges the contributions of each apprentice, praising their efforts while also noting areas for improvement. This isn't mere politeness but a crucial part of the guild system. Public recognition serves as both reward and motivation, while constructive criticism helps maintain the standards that have made Benin bronzes legendary throughout West Africa. As you watch the apprentices carefully clean and store their tools according to strict protocols, you realize that you've witnessed more than just artistic training. You've seen a complete social system in action, one that transforms raw human potential into skilled artisans while preserving traditions that connect the present to an ancient past. The bronze may be beautiful, but the human relationships that create it are equally complex and remarkable. The workshop atmosphere shifts dramatically when a royal messenger arrives at dawn, his elaborate coral-beaded costume and ceremonial staff marking him as a direct representative of the Oba himself. You watch as every bronze caster in the workshop immediately prostrates himself, their foreheads touching the packed earth floor in a display of absolute submission that speaks to the divine nature of royal authority in Benin. The messenger's presence transforms the humble workshop into an extension of the palace itself, where every word carries the weight of royal command and every gesture must reflect perfect respect for the God-King's power. The commission he brings is extraordinary even by royal standards, a complete set of bronze plaques to commemorate the Oba's recent military victories against neighboring kingdoms. These aren't simple decorative pieces but complex historical narratives that will serve as both art and propaganda, telling the story of Benin's expanding power to future generations while demonstrating the divine favor that ensures the kingdom's continued success. The messenger unrolls a scroll covered with detailed sketches and written instructions, each element carefully planned to convey specific political messages. You observe how the master caster's demeanor changes as he examines the royal commission. Gone is the relaxed teacher who patiently guided apprentices through their training. In his place stands a man who understands that his reputation, his livelihood, and possibly his life depend on creating works that perfectly capture the Oba's vision of royal glory. His hands shake slightly as he studies the sketches, calculating the enormous amount of work required and the potential consequences of any failure to meet the exacting standards demanded by divine kingship. The Kingdom of Benin's Royal Bronze Commission served multiple purposes beyond mere decoration, functioning as sophisticated propaganda tools that communicated political messages to both domestic and foreign audiences. These plaques documented military victories, diplomatic relationships, and religious ceremonies while also demonstrating the kingdom's wealth and artistic sophistication. The bronze casters worked closely with court historians and royal advisors to ensure that every detail accurately reflected the official version of events that the Oba wanted preserved for posterity. The commission includes plaques depicting the Oba leading his warriors into battle, his divine power manifested through supernatural size and elaborate regalia that marks him as more than mortal. Other pieces will show defeated enemies offering tribute, Portuguese traders acknowledging Benin's superiority, and court ceremonies that demonstrate the complex hierarchy surrounding divine kingship. Each plaque must be historically accurate while also serving the political purposes that justify the enormous expense of royal bronze work. You notice how the Royal Commission affects every aspect of workshop operations. The finest materials are set aside exclusively for royal use. The purest bronze, the smoothest clay, the most perfectly aged wax. Apprentices who normally work on practice pieces or minor commissions are reassigned to supporting roles, preparing materials and maintaining equipment, while the master caster and his most skilled assistants focus entirely on the royal work. The workshop's entire rhythm reorganizes around the demands of divine kingship. There's a quirky protocol that requires all royal bronze pieces to be blessed by specific court priests before work can begin, with each blessing ceremony timed to coincide with favorable positions of celestial bodies that influence artistic success. While this might seem like mere superstition, the ceremonies also serve practical purposes. They provide opportunities for court officials to review and approve the planned designs while ensuring that religious authorities support the political messages embedded in the bronze narratives. The pressure of royal commissions creates a different kind of artistic environment than the relatively relaxed atmosphere you witnessed during earlier work. Every movement is more deliberate, every decision more carefully considered, and every mistake potentially catastrophic. The master caster assigns his most experienced apprentices to different aspects of the work, creating teams that specialize in specific elements. One group focuses on the Oba's figure, another on enemy warriors, and a third on the elaborate backgrounds that provide context for the main action. The political dimensions of royal bronze work extend far beyond simple artistic representation. You learn that the plaques will be mounted in specific locations within the palace, where they'll be seen by foreign ambassadors, visiting dignitaries, and court officials who need constant reminders of royal power and divine authority. The bronze narratives serve as both historical records and political statements, communicating Benin's strength to potential enemies while reinforcing the loyalty of subjects who might otherwise question royal policies. The master caster explains how royal commissions differ from other bronze work in their attention to symbolic detail. The Oba's regalia must be rendered with absolute accuracy, because any error in depicting royal symbols could be interpreted as disrespect or even treason. The positioning of figures, the relative sizes of different characters, and even the direction of their gazes all carry political significance that must be carefully coordinated with court officials who understand the complex protocols of royal representation. You observe the creation of preliminary wax models for the royal plaques, noting how the master caster works with unusual intensity and precision. These aren't just artistic exercises but political documents that will be reviewed by court officials before final approval for casting. Changes at this stage are relatively easy to make, but once the bronze is poured, any errors become permanent embarrassments that could damage the guild's relationship with the royal court. The workshop's relationship with royal power creates both opportunities and dangers that don't exist in other forms of bronze work. Success in royal commissions can lead to enormous prestige, wealth, and political influence, with master casters sometimes elevated to advisory roles within the court hierarchy. However, failure or perceived disrespect can result in punishment, exile, or worse, making royal work simultaneously the most rewarding and most dangerous aspect of the bronze caster's profession. Historians still argue whether the close relationship between Benin's bronze casters and royal power enhanced or limited their artistic freedom. Some scholars suggest that royal patronage provided resources and motivation that led to unprecedented artistic achievements, while others argue that political constraints prevented the development of more diverse artistic styles and subjects that might have emerged under different circumstances. As the day progresses and work begins on the Royal Commission, you realize that you're witnessing more than just artistic creation. You're seeing the intersection of art, politics, and divine kingship that defined one of Africa's most sophisticated medieval kingdoms. The bronze plaques taking shape under the master caster's hands will outlast the Oba who commissioned them, carrying his political messages and artistic vision into a future that none of these midnight artisans can imagine. The workshop's familiar rhythms begin to change as strange new influences seep through the kingdom like water through cracked clay. You notice it first in the materials. Ingots of brass with slightly different compositions arriving from coastal traders, new tools forged in European style, and most significantly, commissions that request unfamiliar subjects and styles that challenge centuries of artistic tradition. The Portuguese have been trading with Benin for decades now, and their presence is reshaping not just the kingdom's economy but the very nature of bronze casting itself. You watch as the master caster examines a new commission that would have been unthinkable just a generation ago. A bronze plaque depicting Portuguese soldiers alongside Benin warriors, their strange armor and weapons rendered with the same careful attention traditionally reserved for royal regalia. The European traders have become important enough to warrant inclusion in the kingdom's official artistic record, their pale skin and foreign clothing now part of Benin's visual vocabulary. This represents a fundamental shift in how the kingdom sees itself, and its place in a rapidly expanding world. The Portuguese influence extends beyond subject matter to the very materials used in bronze casting. European traders bring brass ingots with different alloy compositions that require adjustments to traditional casting techniques. The new metals flow differently when molten, cool at different rates, and respond to polishing compounds in unexpected ways. You observe apprentices struggling to adapt their inherited knowledge to these foreign materials, sometimes achieving spectacular successes and other times creating expensive failures that must be melted down and recast. The Kingdom of Benin's encounter with Portuguese traders in the late 15th century marked the beginning of a complex relationship that would transform both cultures. The Portuguese were amazed by the sophistication of Benin's bronze work, with some observers comparing it favorably to the finest European art of the period. In return, they introduced new materials, techniques, and artistic subjects that gradually influenced traditional Benin styles while also creating new markets for bronze objects designed specifically for European tastes. The workshop now produces pieces intended for Portuguese buyers, smaller bronzes that can be easily transported, subjects that appeal to European sensibilities, and styles that blend Benin techniques with foreign aesthetic preferences. You watch as an apprentice works on a bronze crucifix, its Christian symbolism rendered in traditional Benin style, creating a hybrid object that belongs fully to either culture while somehow honoring both. These cross-cultural commissions require the bronze casters to become cultural translators, interpreting foreign concepts through their own artistic language. The economic impact of European trade creates new opportunities but also new pressures within the guild system. The Portuguese pay well for bronze objects, but they also have different quality standards and delivery expectations than traditional royal commissions. European buyers care less about the spiritual significance of the casting process and more about consistent quality and timely delivery, forcing the workshop to adapt its ancient rhythms to the demands of international commerce. There's a quirky development where some bronze casters begin incorporating European coins into their alloy mixtures, believing that the foreign metal adds special properties to the finished bronzes. While this practice horrifies traditionalists who see it as contamination of pure Benin techniques, some of the resulting pieces display unusual colors and textures that create new artistic possibilities, suggesting that cultural mixing might lead to innovation rather than corruption. You observe heated debates between older and younger bronze casters about how much change the guild should accept. The master caster, representing generations of tradition, argues for maintaining pure Benin techniques and subjects, while some apprentices push for embracing new opportunities that European trade provides. These aren't just artistic disagreements but fundamental questions about cultural identity and the price of prosperity in a changing world. The Portuguese presence also brings new technical knowledge that challenges traditional methods. European metalworking techniques, while different from Benin approaches, sometimes offer solutions to long-standing problems or suggest improvements to existing processes. You watch as the master caster reluctantly experiments with a European polishing compound, discovering that it produces results comparable to traditional methods while requiring less time and effort. The success creates a dilemma. Should efficiency trump tradition when both achieve similar results? The changing market demands force the workshop to develop new production methods. European buyers want multiple copies of popular designs, leading to innovations in mold making that allow for limited mass production while maintaining quality standards. This represents a fundamental shift from the traditional model where each piece was unique, created for specific purposes and patrons who understood its cultural significance. The guild system itself begins to adapt to new realities. Apprentices now learn not just traditional Benin techniques but also how to work with European materials and create pieces that appeal to foreign buyers. Some workshops begin specializing in export production, while others focus on maintaining traditional royal commissions, creating divisions within the bronze casting community that reflect broader cultural tensions within the kingdom. Historians still argue whether European contact ultimately enriched or impoverished Benin's bronze casting traditions. Some scholars emphasize the new artistic possibilities and economic opportunities that trade provided, while others focus on the gradual erosion of traditional techniques and cultural meanings that accompanied commercial success. The truth likely encompasses both perspectives. Change brought both gains and losses that would only become fully apparent over time. You notice how the workshop's atmosphere reflects these broader cultural tensions. The ancient chants continue during casting ceremonies, but they now compete with discussions about European trade terms and delivery schedules. The sacred aspects of bronze work persist alongside increasingly commercial considerations, creating a complex blend of tradition and innovation that defines this transitional period in Benin's history. As night falls and the workshop prepares for another casting session, you realize that you're witnessing a civilization at a crossroads. The bronze casters continue their midnight rituals, but they're now creating objects for a world that extends far beyond the kingdom's traditional boundaries. The techniques that once served only royal and religious purposes now serve international commerce, transforming both the art and the artists in ways that will echo through centuries of African history. The year is 1897, and you wake to the sound of distant gunfire echoing across Benin City like thunder from an angry sky. The workshop that has been your refuge for these midnight hours suddenly feels fragile and exposed, its ancient walls no match for the British forces that are advancing through the kingdom with devastating efficiency. You watch as the master caster hurriedly wraps the finest bronze pieces in cloth, his hands shaking not from age but from the terrible knowledge that everything his ancestors built over centuries is about to be destroyed in a matter of days. The British punitive expedition has arrived with overwhelming force, ostensibly to avenge the deaths of British officials, but really to seize control of Benin's wealth and eliminate the kingdom's independence once and for all. You can hear the systematic destruction approaching, the crash of falling buildings, the screams of fleeing civilians, and the harsh shouts of soldiers who see the kingdom's treasures not as sacred art but as valuable loot to be divided among the victors. The bronze casters work frantically to hide their most precious pieces, burying some in secret locations and walling others into hidden chambers that they pray the invaders won't discover. The master caster's face is etched with despair as he realizes that the royal palace, home to thousands of bronze plaques that tell the story of his people, is the primary target of the British assault. Centuries of artistic achievement, generations of accumulated knowledge, and the visual history of an entire civilization are about to be scattered to the winds. The 1897 British punitive expedition against the Kingdom of Benin was one of the most devastating cultural destructions in African history, resulting in the looting of thousands of bronze plaques, sculptures, and other artworks that were subsequently sold to museums and private collectors throughout Europe and America. The expedition was triggered by the deaths of British officials during a diplomatic mission, but its true purpose was to eliminate Benin's independence and seize control of the region's lucrative palm oil trade. You witnessed the final hours of the bronze casting workshop as a functioning center of artistic creation. The apprentices gather around their master, listening as he desperately tries to pass on essential knowledge that might otherwise be lost forever. He speaks rapidly, cramming decades of training into minutes, knowing that the guild system that has preserved these techniques for centuries is about to be shattered along with everything else the kingdom has built. The sound of approaching soldiers grows louder, and you can smell smoke from burning buildings mixing with the familiar sense of the workshop. The master caster makes the heartbreaking decision to destroy the furnaces rather than let them fall into enemy hands, using hammers to shatter the carefully constructed fire chambers that have served the guild for generations. The destruction of these tools represents more than just material loss. It's the deliberate severing of connections to ancestral knowledge and traditional ways of life. There's a tragic irony in watching the bronze casters attempt to hide their masterpieces from the very people who will eventually display them in museums as examples of primitive African art. The British soldiers who are about to loot these treasures have no understanding of the sophisticated techniques, complex cultural meanings, or centuries of artistic development that each piece represents. To them, the bronzes are simply valuable objects to be catalogued, shipped, and sold. You follow the master caster as he leads a small group of apprentices through secret passages beneath the workshop, carrying what few pieces they can save from the approaching disaster. The weight of cultural destruction presses down on everyone, not just the physical loss of artworks but the knowledge that an entire way of life is ending. The guild system, the royal patronage, the spiritual significance of bronze casting, all of it is being swept away by forces that see only commercial value in what was once sacred art. The royal palace falls with shocking speed, its bronze-covered pillars torn down, and its treasures loaded onto carts for shipment to England. You watch from hiding as British soldiers systematically strip away plaques that took months to create, handling them with the casual indifference of men moving furniture. The visual history of Benin, its kings, its ceremonies, its victories and defeats, is being erased from its homeland and scattered across the globe. The aftermath of the expedition leaves the bronze casting community in ruins. The guild system collapses without royal patronage, master craftsmen flee or are killed, and the workshops that once hummed with creative activity stand empty and abandoned. The techniques that took centuries to develop face extinction as the social structures that preserved and transmitted them are destroyed along with the kingdom itself. Some bronze casters manage to escape the immediate destruction, taking refuge in neighboring communities or hiding in remote areas until the violence subsides. But even these survivors face an uncertain future in a world where traditional patronage systems have been destroyed and foreign rulers show no interest in supporting indigenous artistic traditions. The knowledge they carry becomes a burden as much as a treasure, valuable but increasingly irrelevant in the colonial world being imposed on their homeland. Historians still argue whether the 1897 expedition represented a unique catastrophe or was simply the most dramatic example of the cultural destruction that accompanied European colonization throughout Africa. Some scholars emphasize the specific targeting of Benin's artistic treasures, while others point to similar patterns of looting and cultural erasure that occurred across the continent during the colonial period. You witness the final moments of the workshop as flames consume the building where you've spent these midnight hours learning about bronze casting. The fire destroys not just physical structures but also the accumulated wisdom of generations, the subtle knowledge about clay preparation, the secret polishing compounds, the spiritual practices that connected artisans to their ancestors. As the roof collapses in a shower of sparks, you realize that you're watching the end of one of Africa's greatest artistic traditions. The bronze pieces that survive the expedition begin their long journey into exile, destined for museums and private collections where they'll be admired for their beauty while being stripped of their cultural context and spiritual significance. The midnight chants that guided their creation will be forgotten. The guild hierarchies that trained their makers will be dismissed as primitive, and the royal ceremonies they depicted will be reduced to anthropological curiosities. As dawn breaks over the ruins of Benin City, you understand that you've witnessed more than just military conquest. You've seen the systematic destruction of a civilization's soul, the deliberate severing of connections between people and their cultural heritage that will echo through generations of African history. The workshop rises from ashes like a phoenix, but it's not the same place you remember from those midnight hours over a century ago. You find yourself in modern-day Benin City, where the descendants of those scattered bronze casters have slowly, painstakingly rebuilt their artistic traditions from fragments of memory and stubborn determination. The new workshop buzzes with activity that feels both familiar and revolutionary. Young artists working with traditional techniques while incorporating contemporary themes that speak to a world their ancestors could never have imagined. You watch as Osagio Basigi, a master bronze caster whose great-grandfather fled during the 1897 expedition, demonstrates the lost wax process to a group of international art students. His hands move with the same confident precision you witnessed in the ancient workshop, but the pieces he creates tell different stories. Modern African leaders, scenes of independent struggles, and abstract forms that blend traditional symbolism with contemporary artistic expression. The techniques survive, but they now serve new purposes in a world where African art is finally being recognized on its own terms. The revival of Benin bronze casting represents more than just artistic restoration. It's an act of cultural reclamation that challenges the colonial narrative that dismissed African art as primitive craft. These modern bronze casters work with full knowledge of where their stolen heritage resides, creating new pieces while simultaneously demanding the return of ancestral works that fill museums from London to Berlin. Their art becomes a form of protest, a declaration that African creativity was never conquered despite centuries of systematic oppression. Contemporary Benin bronze casters have developed innovative techniques that blend traditional methods with modern materials and tools, creating artworks that honor ancestral knowledge while addressing current social and political issues. Many artists now work with themes of diaspora, colonialism, and cultural identity, using the same lost wax techniques that once served royal propaganda to create powerful statements about African experience in the modern world. The revival movement has also sparked international interest in traditional African metalworking techniques, leading to cultural exchange programs and collaborative projects. You observe how the modern workshop operates as both artistic studio and cultural center, where young Nigerians learn not just bronze casting techniques but also the history and significance of their artistic heritage. The master caster explains how each piece connects to ancestral traditions while also speaking to contemporary concerns. A bronze sculpture of a woman in traditional dress carrying a laptop, or a plaque depicting ancient Benin warriors alongside modern Nigerian soldiers, bridging centuries of experience in single artworks. The tools and materials have evolved with the times. Electric furnaces provide more consistent heat than charcoal fires. Modern alloys offer new possibilities for color and texture, and power tools speed up processes that once took days to complete. But the essential techniques remain unchanged. The careful preparation of clay molds, the delicate carving of wax models, and the precise timing of bronze pours that still require the same intuitive understanding that guided ancient masters. There's a quirky development where some contemporary bronze casters incorporate recycled materials from modern life into their traditional alloys, old car parts, discarded electronics, and even melted down colonial-era coins, creating pieces that literally transform the detritus of foreign domination into new expressions of African creativity. This practice connects to ancient traditions of incorporating meaningful materials while also making powerful statements about cultural resilience and transformation. The workshop serves as a training ground for a new generation of African artists who see bronze casting not as a relic of the past, but as a living tradition capable of addressing contemporary challenges. You watch young artists create pieces that deal with environmental destruction, political corruption, and social inequality, using techniques perfected by their ancestors to critique the modern world and imagine better futures for their communities. The international art market has finally begun to recognize the sophistication and value of contemporary African bronze work, but this recognition comes with new challenges. Commercial success can lead to pressure to produce work that appeals to foreign buyers rather than serving local communities, recreating some of the same tensions that emerged during the Portuguese trading period centuries earlier. The artists must navigate between cultural authenticity and market demands while maintaining the spiritual and social significance that gives their work meaning. The digital age has brought unexpected opportunities for cultural reclamation. Online databases allow bronze casters to study their stolen heritage in museum collections worldwide, learning from ancestral techniques while also building cases for repatriation. Social media connects contemporary artists with diaspora communities and international supporters, creating global networks of advocacy for African cultural rights that would have been impossible in previous generations. You witness a powerful ceremony where the workshop community gathers to bless new pieces before they're sent to galleries and collectors around the world. The ritual echoes the ancient practices you observed in the midnight workshop, but it's adapted for contemporary purposes, asking ancestors to guide these modern messengers of African creativity as they travel to foreign lands, carrying stories of survival, resistance, and renewal to audiences who may never have considered the full humanity and sophistication of African civilizations. Historians still argue whether the revival of traditional bronze casting represents genuine cultural continuity, or a romanticized reconstruction of practices that were irretrievably lost during the colonial period. Some scholars emphasize the authentic transmission of techniques through family lines and secret knowledge, while others suggest that contemporary bronze casting is essentially a new art form that borrows symbols and methods from the past while serving entirely different cultural functions. The workshop's relationship with the global art world reflects broader questions about cultural ownership and artistic authenticity in a post-colonial context. These contemporary bronze casters must constantly negotiate between honoring ancestral traditions and creating work that speaks to modern experiences, between serving local communities and participating in international art markets, between preserving cultural purity and embracing innovative possibilities that emerge from cultural mixing. As you watch the master caster put finishing touches on a bronze plaque depicting the return of looted artifacts to African museums, you realize that the midnight chants of ancient bronze casters have evolved into contemporary songs of cultural reclamation and artistic renaissance. The techniques survive, the creativity endures, and the stories continue, transformed but unbroken, carrying the dreams of ancestors into an uncertain but hopeful future. The workshop grows quiet as evening settles over Benin City, but the silence feels different now, not empty, but full of possibility. You stand among the completed bronze pieces, their surfaces catching the last rays of sunlight that filter through the windows, and realize that you've witnessed something extraordinary. The unbroken chain of human creativity that connects ancient midnight chants to contemporary artistic expression. The bronze casters may work with electric furnaces instead of charcoal fires, but their hands still move with the same reverence, their eyes still search for the same perfection, and their hearts still carry the same dreams that guided their ancestors through centuries of triumph and tragedy. The master caster gathers his students for the final lesson of the day, his voice carrying the weight of generations as he speaks about the responsibility that comes with inheriting such a profound artistic tradition. These young bronze casters aren't just learning techniques, they're becoming guardians of cultural memory, keepers of stories that survived colonization, and creators of new narratives that will carry African voices into the future. Each piece they create becomes a bridge between past and present, a testament to the resilience of human creativity in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. You watch as the apprentices carefully clean and store their tools, following protocols that echo the ancient rituals you witnessed in the midnight workshops centuries ago. The reverence for materials and methods remains unchanged, even as the context has transformed completely. These modern bronze casters understand that they're not just making art, they're participating in an act of cultural resurrection that honors ancestors while creating new possibilities for future generations. The legacy of Benin bronze casting extends far beyond the physical objects that grace museums and private collections around the world. The techniques developed in those midnight workshops influenced metalworking traditions across West Africa, while the artistic vision embodied in the bronze plaques continues to inspire contemporary African artists working in every medium imaginable. The midnight chants that once guided molten bronze into perfect forms now echo in the rhythms of modern African music, literature, and visual arts that celebrate the continent's creative heritage. The bronze pieces themselves have become powerful symbols in the ongoing struggle for cultural repatriation and recognition of African artistic achievement. Museums that once displayed these works as examples of primitive art now acknowledge their sophisticated techniques and complex cultural meanings, while governments and institutions increasingly recognize the moral imperative to return stolen cultural heritage to its communities of origin. The bronze caster's midnight labor has become a rallying cry for cultural justice that resonates far beyond the art world. You notice how the workshop serves as a gathering place for the broader community, where elders share stories about the old days while young people learn about their heritage through hands-on participation in traditional crafts. The bronze casting revival has sparked interest in other traditional arts, wood carving, textile weaving, and ceremonial music, creating a cultural renaissance that strengthens community identity while also attracting international attention and support. The spiritual dimensions of bronze casting continue to evolve in the contemporary context. While the ancient religious practices associated with the craft have largely disappeared, many modern bronze casters speak of feeling connected to ancestral spirits when they work, experiencing moments of transcendence when the bronze flows perfectly or when a particularly challenging piece emerges flawlessly from its mold. The midnight chants may be gone, but the sense of participating in something sacred persists. There's a profound irony in how the very techniques that European colonizers sought to destroy have become instruments of African cultural assertion in the modern world. Contemporary bronze casters use traditional methods to create works that challenge colonial narratives, celebrate African achievement, and demand recognition of the continent's contributions to world civilization. The midnight workshops that once served royal propaganda now produce art that serves the cause of cultural liberation and global understanding. The workshop's influence extends into educational institutions where traditional bronze casting techniques are being documented, preserved, and taught to new generations of artists and scholars. Universities across Africa and beyond now offer courses in traditional metalworking methods, ensuring that the knowledge accumulated over centuries won't be lost again. The midnight chants may not be literally preserved, but their spirit lives on in academic curricula and cultural preservation programs. Historians still argue whether the contemporary revival represents authentic cultural continuity or creative reconstruction, but the bronze casters themselves seem less concerned with academic debates than with the practical work of creating meaningful art that serves their communities. They understand that culture is not a museum piece to be preserved unchanged, but a living force that must adapt and evolve to remain relevant to new generations while honoring the wisdom of ancestors. As darkness falls over the workshop and the last apprentice extinguishes the furnace fires, you realize that the midnight chants of Benin bronze casters have never really stopped. They've simply transformed into new forms of expression that carry the same essential message: that human creativity can survive any catastrophe, that cultural knowledge can be preserved even when its physical manifestations are destroyed, and that the dreams of ancestors can inspire new generations to create beauty from the raw materials of existence. The bronze pieces rest silently on their shelves, but they're not really silent at all. They sing with the voices of all the hands that shaped them, all the midnight hours that brought them into being, and all the hopes and dreams that guided their creation. In their gleaming surfaces, you can see reflections not just of light but of the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to be conquered, the artistic vision that transcends political boundaries, and the cultural heritage that belongs not to museums but to the communities that created it and continue to nurture it through every challenge and change. Now let the workshop grow quiet around you, the last echoes of hammers on bronze fading into gentle silence. Feel the warmth of the cooling furnaces wrapping around you like a soft blanket, carrying the sweet scent of palm oil and the lingering whispers of ancient chants that have guided countless hands through the sacred work of creation. The bronze pieces rest peacefully in the gathering darkness, their surfaces reflecting not harsh light but the gentle glow of stars and dreams, each one a keeper of stories that stretch back through centuries of human hope and determination. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of the old songs, feeling the weight of history settling gently on your shoulders like the blessing of ancestors who worked through countless midnight hours to preserve beauty for future generations. The workshop walls seem to pulse with the heartbeat of time itself, connecting you to every bronze caster who ever stood in this sacred space, every apprentice who learned the mysteries of fire and metal, every master who passed down the precious knowledge that transforms earth and flame into eternal art. As sleep approaches, imagine yourself as part of that unbroken chain of creativity, your own dreams joining the midnight chants that still echo through the workshop's quiet corners. The bronze pieces watch over you with the wisdom of ages, their gleaming surfaces holding reflections of all the hands that shaped them and all the hopes that guided their creation. Rest now in the knowledge that some things are too beautiful to be destroyed, too meaningful to be forgotten, and too powerful to be silenced by any force on earth. Sweet dreams, And may your rest be as peaceful as bronze cooling in the gentle darkness of a workshop where time stands still and creativity lives forever.